Okay, chemo part two, which I'm going to call Long Day's Journey into Night. So you get out of the hospital. Before you actually get out of the hospital, depending on the type of chemo you have, I had to have an additional medication that would go home with me. And it's on a tube that runs to my port. And it was about this big in a plastic container that had chemo in it. And so it's kind of dangerous because um, it is a very dangerous chemical. And if somehow you pull that out or it pulls out of the container, it could spill chemo in your household. So they actually send you home with a chemo spill kit. That's awesome. And of course, they have all these things about don't touch it with your hands and don't let your pets near it and don't do this. And I mean, I couldn't have my pets near me with this stuff. So they'd be at my feet and I'm always kind of like pushing them away. It was very annoying. So, but I needed this medication to allow the chemo to keep getting into the cancer in my system. Of course, it's getting into everything in my body because it doesn't just get into that, it gets into everything. So that's just part of the process. You're going to have this annoying side thing you have to do. And it doesn't hurt. It doesn't, you know, cause a lot of side effects technically. Although I was much colder every time I had this process done. So, I mean, you know, you could touch someone and go, oh my goodness, you're freezing. You need a blanket. And I'd be like, fine. So when you go home, they're going to start giving you a bunch of drugs to deal with things. So this drug handles the anti-nausea and vomiting. And if that one doesn't work, then you're going to take this one. If that doesn't work, you can take this one. But you got to take this one at this point, and then 3 hours later, if you're still having problems, you should take this one. Then they start overlapping in strengths, and then that one's supposed to go for 6 hours, but 2 hours later, you're going to take the first one again. And again, they say this, you know, if you need it, if you need it, if you need it. Boy, did I need it. One of the things that happens with chemo is that you'll develop very strong nausea, vomit responses. And depending on your system and how you handle that, and for me, it was extreme. And remember, I'm also doing 3 times the normal chemo that a smaller person would take. So it was very strong, and I had to take the drugs. Well, these drugs, their big component is they're going to dry you out because that's what they're doing. They're sapping the fluids, and they're going to give you constipation. And it also, between the drugs and the chemo, gives you insomnia. Great combinations. Within 4 hours, I felt like I was turning into, you know, the skin of a snake that had shed. I mean, it was so cracked and dry, especially like around here, you know, on the forehead and down through. I was just dry as a bone. And then I couldn't, you know, no fluids. I'm now in a dry mouth, couldn't talk sometimes. And so it's a catch-22 because you need to drink a lot of fluids, but as soon as you drink some fluids, of course, you want to get sick. And of course, then you have to take another pill that's fighting that. So what do I do? And then you have to deal with, you know, the other side effects at the same time, like everything has to be room temperature. You can't drink something that's too hot or too cold because it'll burn. By the way, things that are too hot or too cold, when you drink them, will feel like shards of glass down your throat. It will be that painful if you're not careful. And so you actually have to take very tiny sips and kind of let them trickle down. You take a big swallow, shards of glass. That's what you're swallowing. It's awesome. So I'm dealing with dehydration. I'm dealing with insomnia. I did throw up once. Did have some headaches, and you can take Aleve or something like that. You can't take sleeping pills because that counteracts some of the medication problems. So you're trying to get sleep while you're doing all this, and you're trying to stay positive. And it's just kind of a really yucky 2 days. And I have to fly to a client in a couple of days, so I'm getting nervous about how all this is going to shake out. And they assured me that we have a drug for that. We'll get you through it. No problem. So this happens on a Friday, the long day's journey into night. Then on Sunday, because that's really what happens the whole weekend. That's the first weekend that's how it worked out, that back and forth. On Sunday, I go back to get the thing removed from the port because it's done its magic. And I mentioned I was having some pain, and then we'll just watch it. If it gets worse, you can always call us. And by that evening, late in the evening, it felt like someone was literally punching me in the spine. And honestly, it was feeling a lot like when I had that pain the first time that sent me to the hospital, where we thought it was going to be an emergency appendectomy. It got so bad I had to call the nurse line, and they're like, you have to call 911. I think this is like now 12:30, 1 in the morning. And firefighters get there, they start doing their tests. EMTs get there, they start taking over. And they can't seem to find anything wrong with me, so they're starting to poke and prod. At one point, the EMT just pulls the sheet down, and it was like, okay, first off, you all should know I don't wear pajamas. So all of a sudden I was like, and the room is very cold. It was like, I'm just saying, it took a while for them to move the sheet back. But anyway, so the process, I know you can't get that out of your head now. The process was interesting. So they do all their tests and they can't figure anything out. Like, we have to go to the hospital. So off I go to the hospital, which is very traumatic for anyone that gets left behind, and COVID wasn't massively a problem at this point. That we're talking late February, but it was present. And so we made the decision that, someone would stay home, and I went to the hospital alone, had phone, had iPad, had everything, with me. And they start doing their tests, and they hook me up to some fluids because I'm obviously dehydrated. In fact, I was massively dehydrated because of the drugs. I was so dehydrated that they pumped into me 6 quarts of fluids. That's a lot. So I'm in the hospital, and they can't seem to figure out what's wrong, and they're doing various blood work and other things. So the port's getting a workout. And my oncologist was very angry after we met the next time, because he was like, why didn't they do another, scan? They should have, done some kind of CT scan, and they would have noticed that I had a blockage. And that was what was causing the pain. So I dehydrated so much to the point that there was no movement. That is a very real possibility for anyone. If you've never had a blockage, they're incredibly painful. So I was in the hospital for, I want to say, I don't know, 20 hours, something like that. And after I finally had my child, which is what it felt like, and no, I will never know, ladies, how that really feels like. But if I could imagine that's how it felt like I'm like, then times 10 is what I'm thinking. So, I'm having my little screaming fit, and then all of a sudden all the pain went away. And then, they continued to give me more fluids and more drugs. So, by the way, in the hospital, they doped me up on this one particular drug. So it was masking the pain. That's very dangerous because they hadn't identified where it was really coming from. So I could have burst my colon. So yeah, it was not cool. And in the interim, of course, this is happening, and I'm supposed to be on a plane soon, and I'm obviously not going to make the plane because I am now wiped out and can't function. Have to cancel on a client. I've never had to do that before. Yet I had all these promises. So meet with the nurses again. They're like, oh no, they didn't give you very good information. It's not if you feel like you need it. You should always take all these drugs for anti-nausea and vomiting. And it's not, should you become constipated, take Senna or Miralax. You should take them immediately. So now I'm doing this next kind of catch-22 weird thing where I have to take, drugs that will speed up the process and other drugs that want to stop the process. It's very awkward. But it did allow me to kind of maneuver and get to some kind of normal around this. But I started to have massive amounts of neuropathy, massive headaches, and I just started to shut down, and literally my hands would shake from nerve pain. And I was having difficulty walking up and down stairs. This is after one treatment. Now, it's a 2-week process before you have chemo again. So the first week was terrible. The second week wasn't so bad. But of course, the first week is when I had client work, and that didn't happen. So it's also at this point that I am starting to analyze COVID. And this is going to lead up to a major decision that I have to consider. And so when I went in for my second chemo treatment, I started to talk to the staff about COVID and what I was seeing for numbers, and the fact that the cancer center, the nurses at that point were not wearing masks. And I found that to be disturbing. And there was no mask for me. And that's because they felt it wasn't big enough of an issue yet where they had to do that. And this is, we're now into early March. And closer to the middle of March, actually, now that I think about it. So it's starting to become a big issue, but no one's really addressing everything yet. And of course, we're getting messages saying, oh, no, it's all going to pass by, blah, blah, blah. But I'm looking at the numbers and I'm watching them go up. And I said, look, if I see these numbers steadily go up, we're going to have to really talk about that and see what that means. So chemo 2 happens. And now I need even more fluids. I need pre-fluids and after fluids in addition to everything else because of the problems I had. And they are giving me an additional drug. And then the nurses give me new drugs to take in addition to the old ones. So I'm up to about, 7 different drugs right now to deal with all of the side effects that I've been going through. And even then, it was not accommodating. Things actually got worse. Now, despite the drugs, I was having nonstop, nonstop, that's not really the right word, but I was throwing up a lot. And I was losing massive amounts of weight. And in fact, in a 2-week period, I lost 22 pounds. 2 weeks, 22 pounds. And this is something that becomes a very real issue. And the doctor's like, you have to gain weight. I said, what do you mean I have to gain weight? I'm X number of pounds overweight. I am the classic American obesity problem here. And he's like, you misunderstand. You are wasting away. Wasting is a problem for large people in chemo. You can lose weight so fast that what will happen is it will shut down some of your organs and you can die from it. Wow. So what irony. My whole life I try to lose weight. And when I'm finally losing weight, I can't lose weight anymore. So now I've got other drugs to deal with that. The weekend that I did chemo was so bad, I'm literally throwing up into the cancer center as I'm walking into it. And I ended up having a food poisoning moment that was so excruciating painful. So keep in mind, I'm taking drugs to make me have a bowel movement. I'm taking drugs that prevent me from having that. And I get food poisoning, which I don't understand because we were really good with the measurement of temperature of food. It was the worst hour of my life, and I've been through a lot. I mean, I thought the spine punching pain was bad. This was something on a whole nother level. I have never screamed continuously before like that in my life. Screaming. Almost went back to the hospital again. So that was another setback. And in addition to all the other side effects that were coming in now, I was getting a rash. And I'm like, ooh. And then I'm start looking at the side effects of COVID. Am I getting COVID? Did I somehow get COVID from a box that came into the house? We were sanitizing everything. We were using Instacart, we're being super, super careful, gloves and all that other stuff. And I wasn't allowed to do anything, so everything's being done for me. And at the end of all that, in between chemo 2 and 3, COVID was becoming a very big issue. And in this next video, you're going to learn about the biggest decision I've ever had to make in my life. And it's not going to be necessarily the popular decision, but I hope you understand why.